2024. This is the Arlington County Board of Equalization hearings. There are 7 board members present. Mr. Hoffman is virtual, and 6 cases on the agenda. The first RPC is RPC 180130011 at 1210 North Richfield. Mr. Harmon, you can start with your 8 minutes and tell us about this property.
Yes, good morning. This is Lion Place at Clarendon Center. It's a mixed-use property that consists of a 244-unit apartment building. It has a 76,000 square foot office building and then 29,000 square feet of retail. As of the date of value, the office and retail combined was 47% vacant. We appealed based on the assessment of the office and retail assessment. The initial assessment was bifurcated between the multifamily, and then a second portion of the assessment was office and retail. That's the portion that we appealed. The initial assessment for the office and retail portion of the property represented a 12% increase over the 2023 assessment, despite the vacancy at the property increasing by 17% year over year and NOI decreasing by 31% over that same time frame. So even as the property saw NOI decrease by 1.1 million on the initial assessment for the office and retail, again represented a 12% increase over the 2023 assessment. That came out to about $6 million worth of an increase. Now the county's test page is a little difficult to sift through. It's 16 columns. So if you'd be so kind as to turn to our appeal, which is on page 44 of the county's PDF, I'll walk you through what our issues were with that initial assessment for the office and retail portion, and just why the initial assessment came out 12% higher, despite the weakened conditions at the property year over year. So on page 44, you can see the assessment initially valued both the office and retail together and imputed a vacancy rate of just 7.7%, when actual vacancy at the property again was 47%. This was split apart from the county's review, with the office and retail being assessed separately upon their test columns. So initial assessment valued office retail together. County's test split them apart and reviewed them separate. But our appeal, again, is based on the initial assessment methodology, which combined the two, which is common for offices with ground floor retail. This is how the county's assessed other mixed-use properties, and that's how this property itself has been assessed in years past. So that's how we review it. Now, on the county's review, again, they split them apart. So the final review from the county is actually 3 different assessments. You have multifamily, office, and retail. Again, that's contrary to how the initial assessment valued the property and how prior years' assessments have valued the property, which is multifamily, and then a separate one for office and retail. So upon the county's review, they did increase the vacancy rate from a blended rate of that 7.7% on the initial assessment. That's largely what was responsible for the 2024 assessment coming in 12% higher than the 2023. They did increase that blended rate from 7.7% to 21% for the combined office and retail. But again, that's still not uniform with how other mixed-use properties are valued in the county. It's also not consistent with how this property was initially assessed, nor how it's been assessed in prior years. Both other mixed-use properties in the county and then this property in prior years and on the initial assessment have been assessed as office with ground floor retail, and then the office vacancy rate is applied to that. Given that this property was 47% vacant, the vacancy rate should be 28% per the Arlington County guidelines. And again, this is consistent, equalized, uniform with other mixed-use properties in the county, as well as prior years' assessments for this property. Next, both the initial assessment and the revision impute rent on the vacant office space at $50 per square foot. This is well above what this space is likely to lease up for based on the most recent leasing activity at the property, as well as what is advertised online. So one new lease was signed for the office in 2023. Had an October 2023 start date. That had a face rental rate of $41.50 per square foot. That's before any concessions were considered. That lease required $3.20 per square foot in concessions. Taken together, this new October 2023 lease had a net effective rental rate of only $38.31. That again compares to the assessment, which imputes rent on the vacant office at $50 per square foot. This property is not even advertising vacant space at that high of a rate. Next, the initial assessment imputed expenses for the combined office and retail at just under $1 million. This was revised down on the county's test, which was again separated out between the retail and office, but that combined income for office and retail was revised down from $1 million to $850,000. This is below what the property has incurred for operating expenses for the combined retail and office portions of this property over the past 3 years. From 2020 to 2023, so 4 years, 2020 to 2023, the property has averaged $1,050,000 in operating expenses. That's for the office and retail combined. Past 4 years average $1,050,000 operating expenses. The county's revision took the combined down from the initial assessment at $1 million in OpEx to only $850,000 in operating expenses. Final issue, the cap rate used by the assessment is not indicative of a 47% vacant office building. It's based on, as we've heard the county testify, an 8% vacant building. Now, we know from market transactions that a premium would be added to the cap rate to account for the decreased income at the property that's 47% vacant and the increased risk of not being able to lease it up, not being able to get income on that space, especially in the market that has experienced negative net absorption over the past 4 years. So in an attempt to summarize and try to tie this all together, given the different methodologies used between the initial assessment and the review, and then the 16 columns across the county's test page, the high level picture is, how did the initial assessment increase by 12% for the retail and office when actual NOI at the property decreased 31% and vacancy increased 17%? Well, the initial assessment increased because it valued the retail and office portion combined and used $50 per square foot for vacant office, which is higher than both the most recent leasing activity at the property as well as what's advertised at the property. The initial assessment applied a combined vacancy rate of 7.7% instead of the guideline rate of 28% to that portion of the property. The initial assessment also used operating expense rate that is lower than what the 4-year average at the property was. Finally, the initial assessment made no DFL for the excess vacancy at the property. Again, the initial assessment imputed 7.7% vacancy when the property was actually 47% vacant. So it should have used 28% vacancy and then included a DFL for the excess vacancy. So upon the county's review, they ended up changing methodologies, split out the retail and office portions, still used $50 for vacant office instead of the sub $40 rate that the market's actually shown this property to be worth. The review increased vacancy from 7% to 21% instead of the guideline rate of 28%. It also lowered expenses below the 4-year average by a couple $100,000 a year. With that, I'm open for questions and please ask if you have. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Shuttlesworth for the county, please.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Just like Mr. Harmon stated, this is a mixed-use property building. It was built in 2011. It has the commercial component is composed of 28,839 square feet of retail space and 76,055 square feet of office space. The subject is located just across the street from the Clarendon Metro Station. The amenities include a fitness center, indoor pool, residence club room, and we did inspect in June 2023. The issues on the appeal, they are contesting the commercial component only, the vacancy, OpEx, and the potential rent and the cap rate, as well as the discount for the lease up. The 2024 pro forma for the apartments was not provided. We also did not receive the rent information. The appellants requested that we only review the commercial component. This case was heard by the board in 2022. From what I have learned by watching the recording of the hearing, back then they also asked to review only part of the property, not the entire property. I believe they excluded retail at that time, and the board did confirm the assessment. Upon submission of the assessment review application submitted by the appellants, it is our standard practice to consider and review the property as a whole. In this case, just as in any other cases where the subject of the review is a mixed-use property, we consider all the components and the total income the property generated. So I would like to talk about each component. Let me start from the apartments. So the potential rent reported in 2023 increased by 5.5%. Year prior in 2022, the potential rent increased by 4.79%. If the board could take a look at column E1, and so column E1 represents the appellant's figures for 2023, and then our revision column F1. So in our revision column F1, we project only 2.18% growth. And again, they reported growth of 5.5% and 4.79% in 2022. So we were very conservative right there. As we move down to the columns E1 and F1, the 2023 reported vacancies and concessions were at 3.66%, and we applied stabilized vacancy and concessions at 6%. When we actually visited this property back in June 2023, we were not able to visit even one single apartment unit because they were 100% occupied. Now, in regards to the EGI, our projected EGI is below the EGI in column E1. Our OPEX projections are higher than the OPEX the property achieved in 2023. They reported OPEX of $10,102 per unit. We projected $10,421 per unit. And lastly, when we get to the NOI, which is line 19, just please take a look at the numbers. Our projected NOI is below the NOI they reported in 2023. I think this is pretty much evident that we underassessed the apartment. So let me move on to the commercial component, retail. The potential rent for the retail component also saw an increase in 2023. It was an 8% increase. Year prior, they reported an over 4% increase. We projected less than 1% increase in our column F2. We also applied 7% vacancies and concessions per our commercial guidelines and 7.3% cap rate. Finally, we're getting to the office portion, which is 76,500 square feet of net leasable area. This is a large office space building, and we applied office guidelines. We utilized the cap rate of 7.05, and we separated all the components of this property. We used the applicable cap rates and vacancies and concessions for both residential, retail, and large office space. The office space definitely has been struggling. It experienced 47% vacancy as of January 1, 2024. Based on the rent roll provided, the rate per square foot achieved as of January 1 was $50.79. We used $50 per square foot. We also excluded $10,000 of square feet from the potential rent calculations, as this space is occupied by a nonprofit organization, National Leadership Institute, and it is a non-income producing space. We used vacancies and concessions of 28%. We also apply rent loss adjustments for excess vacancy below the line. Our adjustment is actually higher than the adjustments they proposing. So, and again, we separated all these components. We use the applicable guidelines for each one of those components. And I think it's important to note that they are applying $46.85 per square foot for leased space, although the rent roll they provided indicates the average rate of $50.79. That's it. I'm open for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Questions from board members? Mr. Lawson?
This is for the county. What was the vacancy rate of the apartments? You say there were none, there was 100%. In the operating year, it looks like 3.8%.
So they were 100% occupied as of June 2023.
Okay.
Yes.
Great, thank you.
Any other? Mr. Mendez?
Yeah, Ellen, you'd mentioned that the retail and office is 40% vacant. Do you know what that breaks down to as far as, what it is for each one of them?
It's 47% vacant and it's all office. So the office has 49,000 square feet of vacant office.
Mr. Matt?
For the department, the F columns, the F was the 2 and 3, retail and office individual columns. Did you get that did you get that directly from the appellant after their initial submission where the retail and office were submitted together? These aren't your numbers in F2 and 3.
Yes, these are our projected numbers, and yes, that was after the review application was received. As Mr. Harman stated, in our original calculations in our 2024 analysis, we didn't use the guidelines for large office space. And we just last year, this property was reviewed. It didn't go to the board. I believe they accepted the offer. And by the way, this is why the increase is above the average, because we did decrease the assessment last year. So last year we did the same thing on review. We separated all 3 components: apartment, retails, and office.
Is that standard? The appellant said that usually commercial, retail, and office go together. That's not my experience. Is it yours?
So in this case, we're dealing with large office space. It's over 50,000 square feet. And we determined that it would be more appropriate to use large office guidelines.
Yeah, because the cap rates are different, the vacancy guidelines are different, everything's different. But again, these numbers you got from the appellant, or you just ferreted them out from their original submission? Which one?
Well, we
The F
did.
columns.
Our F columns are projection columns. So these are our numbers.
Best estimates. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay, that's it for now. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I had the follow-up.
Mr. Matt?
I'm sorry. I lost it and found it. Still, for the department, the 47% office vacancy is the data value. How come, given that you have 3 discrete columns, residential, retail, office, why didn't you go below the line on the column that reviews the office experience? Lease up costs, TI, all that, commissions.
Well, so that's below the line adjustment of $3.9 million. This is the adjustment, and that actually includes rent loss, TIs, and leasing commissions.
Oh, it's all lumped together.
It's
Right.
all lumped together. They separated it. We lumped it together.
That's what I did. That's what confused me. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Shuttlesworth, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Yes, so again, this is a mixed-use property situated on one parcel, and as always, once we receive the review application, we analyze all the components, residential and commercial. The apartment and retail components have been going strong, both experience increasing potential rents for the past year. During 2023 inspections, we were not able to see one single unit because of 100% occupancy. We undervalued the apartment component, and the office component has been struggling. We do acknowledge that. Our below the line adjustments actually is higher than their own below the line adjustments. And with that being said, I ask the board to reduce the subject's total assessment to $156,634,100. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Harmon, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yes, thank you. So this property, again, looking at the retail and office portions, the NOI decreased by $1.1 million year over year. Vacancy increased by 17%. If we segregate just the office as the county wishes to, the office portion was 64% vacant, yet it still has a cap rate that's the same as an 8% vacant property. The vacant office space is valued on the county's revision at $50 per square foot. This is despite that rate not even being advertised that high, recent leases being at $38 a square foot. If we want to look at the increase to the county's apartment, and then add that to a corrected office and retail, it still results in a large reduction. I mean, if we put vacant office at the actual recent lease rate, if we bump expenses back up to the initial rate, which is based on the historical 4-year average, then it still, and take the DFL, it still results in a value of the low 140s. So I just ask that the board look at all components of the office and the retail, and not just the apartments. Thank you.
All right, thank you both. All right, it's just among the board. Okay, go ahead.
Feel free to go first.
All right, well, I mean, I'll just say, I look at this and I guess I'm surprised to hear the appellant saying, oh, I don't like that it's split out. I mean, all we hear from appellants is we'd like to see them all split out. So now they have the information through splitting it out, you know, but in the sense that office and retail are combined, you know, and he's only trying to do one portion of it. You know how I feel about that. You can't do one portion. You got to look at the whole thing. You know, I look at this and think the operating expenses reported were over $11 million. And when you look at what they're using, I mean, frankly, E2 and E3, what she's guesstimated out, minus, you know, that's like 5.6, and then minus what she used as a test. The NOI for those two portions are under by $1.7 million. I mean, frankly, I don't know where the test came from, because I think the original assessment is fine. Love to hear what other. Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, I'm very sympathetic about the office because long before the pandemic, we realized that multi-use is fine if it's residential office or residential retail, but when it's all three, it's just a mess. And so it's hard to market office anyway, but it's really hard to market it in this type of a mixed use environment. But having said that, I think you got to look at the whole thing. I really do. But I would urge the county to make that clear. You know, if you're going to, you can't appeal part on a mixed use project. You got to appeal the whole thing or provide us information for.
Right, well, I think that is clear. I mean, this is not the first time somebody's come in and tried to do one portion of it. It is an economic unit. It is all one. I think that's pretty clear. And to me, for an appellant to come in and only do a portion of it, it's a waste of their time because you can't look at it separately. Go ahead.
You're suggesting, as an example here, and I think this is what the department just suggested, that, well, we were generous, overly generous on the apartment evaluation, and we're going to bear down on the two commercial components. They didn't say this, but to offset it so that it's all fair. You know, you got 3 columns, 3 sets of guidelines, 3 cap rates, 3 this, 3 that. I don't know. Obviously, I'm an outlier here. I don't know why they can't be looked at individually and then added up. In residential, we're always careful not to say, well, if the land is this, then the improvement's that. I mean, it is one. But here they're discrete. They're marketed discreetly. They have a common roof, and that's it.
Well, you might have common maintenance, man. And so your maintenance, like let's say you got to replace the roof.
That's
you allocate that to. You got to allocate it to the whole building.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm very, very sympathetic. I really am. But I don't see how you can break it into a part and say, okay, we only look at this part when it's being managed by the owner as a totality.
Right, and the other thing I would say, Ken, I mean, if you just look from a standpoint of D1, the original assessment just for the apartments was 5.3.
NOI.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, so this is what I'm saying, when you lump it all into one pot, then you've got under E1, 5.7.
Yeah, that was brought up, yeah.
Right.
So
no,
it's like
so then
generous,
when-
yeah.
You know, so you can't go and change and go, oh, well, out of that pot, the commercial portion or the office portion, whatever portion you want to look at, is less, so we got to adjust that, and that's fine. Well, then that income has to be allocated someplace. So if it didn't come from the retail or didn't come from the office, then it had to have come from the apartment. And that's what she did. She went back through and said, all right, I'm gonna take a look at these numbers and see, we were overly generous on the apartments which had the lower cap rate. You know, we're gonna fix that and then, put less over there under the other two. I mean, it just, to me, it's a pot that you can't pull part of it out and go, we don't like this part, and not look at the other two.
What do you guys think?
I agree. I think we need to look at the whole thing. We should provide.
Because it's one real estate tax.
And that's how we came down on the last two that came.
I know that. I'm fully aware of that.
I messed
Mr.
around
Mendez.
and try to bump up the expenses a little bit for the retail and office, because it seemed a little bit low compared to historical reporting, but that's, you do this, I think, they're not gonna provide the department. For Mr. Lawrence.
Well, I would add that given that they're assessed separately, you can't just say the commercial component. Retail is different than office and office is different than retail. And I thought I heard the appellant say, well, traditionally they're reported together. If I'm correct that he said that, I disagree with that. They're not, they're separate. And certainly that's what the F columns are for.
Right,
Let's
so
look
she
at them
said that
individually.
last year it was assessed, broken up.
Well, not just this case, but every property that we see, they're broken out because they're considered differently. But you're saying the sum can't be greater or less than the whole. I mean, you look at them individually to come up with something intelligent for the entire property.
Points brought up a
Very
good
respectfully.
point. The allocation of maintenance and things, I mean, that's a tough one.
Yeah,
People
yeah.
in buildings.
Yeah.
You get cleaning supplies, go this direction, go that direction.
And
go that-
admin,
Yeah,
to an extent.
that's where I think some of that operating expense might be not as separate as would be in the individual buildings.
Yeah. So that muddies it up a bit.
Mr. Hoffman, anything? Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, I got a little echo. There's kind of double-edged sword of this type of property. You've got something that doesn't fit the box for, a large apartment REIT to own. So you can't really take that cap rate market for the sale of apartment buildings and apply it to this, because most of those tables are built on, UDR, buying a property that's 100% resi or 99% resi. It's kind of unique. Saw centers, they operate a couple of these properties in the region. And generally what I've seen is they're very well located. The retail is very well done. The building is constructed to a higher standard than you're used to seeing. And so they cost more upfront. They're built to a lower yield because they're meant to be held for a very long time. So, I don't view this as kind of a distressed property. The plus side of the mix of the three uses, there are lots of downsides, but the plus side is, in a down office market, the apartments can carry this property. And the retail is strong, right? So you've got very strong retail at the base that's kind of like an anchor. So I view it as kind of a unique investment. I don't think we have a cap rate table that really works for this type of property in the county. I don't agree with, general commercial 7.3 cap for a Trader Joe's, right? So you kind of, in the totality, what I've done is look at it a couple of different ways. Just take the overall NOI. This building's over 10 years old. You usually will cycle through the initial kind of lease up in the office, and then you're going to have some downtime as you try to replace those first tenants. So I think we're in that downturn. So if you look at it as like a 3-year or a 4-year average NOI, versus just saying this office is worth 50% less because we've lost a couple of floors of leasing, right? So in short, I ran two numbers. I ran a 3-year average and I ran a 4-year average because I know a lot of times we do 3 and a lot of times we do 4. So I'm not really sure which one's right. And then I just did a blended cap rate of 6 on the whole property. And I came up with on the 3-year average 149 million and change, and on the 4-year average 100, right around 156 million, which is closer to where the county's at right now.
All right.
Either one's a modest reduction.
I think it's too hard to do a blended cap rate.
Yeah.
Not hard for me. I mean, these are well executed properties. I have no problem with putting a 6 cap on something like this.
I just think based on the income, I mean, for me, where I am, I'm on the original assessment, not the reduction. I don't know where everybody else is. Let's get a little tablet.
Yeah, Johnny and I just compared notes.
I don't need the
Yeah.
details. I need the
Reduction.
Decision.
Yeah.
A reduction based on what, to what? Oh, you mean the
reduction
the county-
recommended by the county, not,
That's,
not ours.
that's all.
Okay.
I'm okay with it.
Okay, then
Run
I-
a couple of numbers, so-
And it's close enough to one thing that Mr. Hoffman's done, so. Yeah, so I won't make the motion because I don't agree with it, but somebody can make the motion.
I'll make it. I move that we accept the county's proposed reduced assessed value of $156,634,100.
Linda's on favor. Opposed. Okay, it is 5-2, and that's without Mr. Hoffman. The county's revised number of 156,634,100 has been confirmed.
Thank you, board. Thank you, John.
Thank you. I see Mr. Peralta. Thank you. Next RPC is 16010040 on North Lynn Street. Mr. Harmon, you can start with your 8 minutes on this property, sir.
Yes, thank you. So 1700 North Moore, this is the building that's above the Roslyn Metro. It was built in 1979 and was over 26% vacant as of the date of value. Now, I do want to note on this one, contrary to the last one, this one is a mixed-use property with office and 66,000 square feet of retail. The county's valued it as a combined assessment. Again, they didn't separate it out as the last case. This is what we see on these mixed-use properties where there's office and retail. It's one assessment. This is the uniform equalized methodology that was rejected by the board on the prior case. This is the same methodology that we'll see on subsequent cases today as well. With our appeal shown on page 39 of the county's PDF, we argue for lower rental income, higher expenses, and a higher cap rate to reflect the market value of this property as of January 1st. Today, I just want to focus on 2 issues, the concessions at the property and the retail rental rate. Looking at the 4-year operating history of this property, you can see that the property has averaged about $1.5 million in concessions each year, with nearly $2.5 million in concessions in 2023 alone. This property has shown consistent concessions over each of the past 4 years, and again is 26% vacant. Knowing this, the owner does anticipate concessions be incurred for 2024. Now, the county's test applies an 8% concession rate to the in-place office rental rate. However, this only works out to total concessions of less than $900,000. This, of course, is much less than actual concessions, which were $2.5 million last year and have averaged $1.5 million over the past 4 years. Accounting for concessions at the 4-year average rate of $1.5 million would result in a rental rate on in-place office leases of $39.24 per square foot. Going next to the retail rental rate, if you take a look at the rent roll on page 46 of the county's PDF, you'll see that 66,000 square feet of retail space is listed as leased at the property. The majority of this space is, there's about 30,000 square feet, that's a food court. Then there's another 30,000 square feet, and that 30,000 square feet is Not really clear on the rent roll what that is. That's partially the property's amenity space. It's conference centers, it's the fitness center. They have a chill lounge that we saw in the inspection that we did. They also have free kombucha that's included in that retail space, and that's the space. The rental rate on that is 10% of gross sales. For 2024, the owner estimates that 30,000 square feet, again, it's not all retail, some of it's amenity space as well. The owner estimates that space will generate $96,000 in 2024. That tenant paid $0 in 2023. Now, on this same space, again, estimated for 2024 by the owner, and we included this on the appeal as well, estimated to earn $96,000. The assessment has imputed nearly $1 million for 2024 income on that space. Both of these items go to anticipated income for 2024, concessions that have averaged $1.5 million over each of the past 4 years, and the 30,000 square feet of retail space that did not pay any rent in 2023 actually includes some amenity space. The owner is anticipated to earn less than $100,000 on that space. The assessment imputes about $1 million of income on that space. We've documented our analysis for the assessment's cap rate for this property. Primarily 1201 Wilson, a comparable property within a block from the subject, sold at a cap rate of 9.85% versus the current assessment on this property, less than a 7.8%. And finally, I just want to make a note of what the county may not have understood on the I&E that was submitted. So the owner on the 2023 I&E commingled the office and retail rental income. Now, this is important because if you look at what the county labels a reconstructed column on their test sheet, you'll see that retail income is effectively double counted. First, it's counted on row 1, where the owner reported it in 2023 with the office income. Then it's counted a second time on row 2. Essentially, what the county has done is assume the owner reported $0 in rental income in 2023. Instead of clarifying if they earned any retail income, you just assume that it did not. And then they added the retail income a second time on row 2. If you correct the county, what they call again a reconstructed column, if you correct that double counting of the retail income, you'll see that the county's own analysis on the reconstruction also supports a reduction to the assessment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Peralta for the county, please.
Yes, good morning. For this property, we did do the review based on the information that was provided. The I&E is very clear in what we're asking. What was the office income? What was the retail? They didn't report any retail income for this property. Looking at the previous years, you'll see that it's been consistent year over year, 12.5, 12.8, 12.1. And in the most recent year, little over 12 million. As Mr. Harmon stated, they don't expect any income for this for the retail portion, but the county is projecting forward and comparing this space with other space in the county. So we did project upon what was seen in the rent roll and what was seen in the market. So looking at the overall picture of this property, we'd just like to compare the original assessment with what was reported, and then following what is the test upon having this information. So the original assessment, we underestimated the square feet, the actual square feet of the property. We were about 139 square feet shy of what was reported in the 2023 rent roll. In the original assessment, we were 18. We overstated the vacancy of the property by 18,075 square feet. So when looking at percentage wise, we projected that the property would be 30% vacant, whereas the 2023 reported it was 26% vacant. So in essence, because of that, we did deduct 1.4 million below the line because of that overestimation. Looking at the gross potential of the property, you'll see that the income wasn't reported for that retail portion or that vacant portion. We did reconstruct based on using the agent's number, we do kind of mirror what the agent is projecting. We're 300,000 more than what the agent's projecting for the office portion. So we did deduct, if you compare what they reported in 2023 office, we're about 2 million or so shy of what they actually reported. When looking at the gross potential of the property, we're about almost $1 million less than the reported original. And then when you compare what we tested, we're about 659,000 less than when you reconstruct the original INE for that vacant space that wasn't accounted for. In addition to that, we did see that there were some spaces in the rent roll that weren't indicating any rent. MSP Rosin LLC didn't report any rent. That's a retail portion. And then Stuck in the Sand was another tenant that didn't report any income. I believe that was part of the office portion. And then I did find a lease that didn't expire till April of actually, I'm sorry, that was April 2023. So disregard that last comment. For the vacancy, we're indicating a 2.1 deduction higher than what was reported for the original assessment. I mean, for the original 2023 concessions is what it amounted to. I think they're reporting 2.459. Expenses, when we projected the original expenses, we were in line with what was reported in 2022. If you compare columns D in expenses to column C in expenses, the total amount, we're above that, and that's what we use to guide us for the 2024 assessment. Upon review, there was an increase that we did see, so we adjusted upwards in our test column F for those expenses. Again, the overall NOI in our original assessment was 503,000 less than what was reported in the 2023 NOI when reconstructed. And then in the test, we're about 480,000 less than what was reconstructed for the 2023 INE. Again, the difference between the test and the original assessment, we did a lot for 1.4 million more than we ought to, based on the vacancy of property, again, 30% versus 26%. So with that, we do see that for this property, the sort of the food court did a renovation, and they did not repurpose, but remarket it with, I believe, new tenants in there. So therefore, the projection of this retail portion is as such. They didn't expect any income because they're doing the renovation, and therefore, I believe they launched or relaunched this year under a new management company, if you will. But with that, we do ask that you confirm the original assessment, and we're open for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Questions from board members? Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, for the county, columns A, B, and C, were those reconstructed, or they accurately reflect what the owner submitted?
Their actual income with no vacant income included.
And adjustments made to operating expenses.
Okay, other questions? Mr. Metzger?
For the department, column F, you account for vacant space. In the top, in page 4, the top left, net leasable area is 430,000 plus. And a minute, I'm getting what mean, the actual vacancy, the way I saw it originally was, in column one, row one, column F, almost 251,000 square feet, and a building of a little over 430,000 square feet, which is a 39% vacancy. Maybe the problem, you can go, I mean, I got about 5 numbers here all at once. I'm trying to
Any other
juggle them.
questions?
And they'll just go past me because I'm.
Okay. All right, Mr. Peralta, if you wrap up then for a minute.
Yes, again, the county's overall test did include a lot of the figures that we didn't show or that wasn't shown on the reported 2023 INE, of which there was more clarity in the vacant square footage. That to me is the main difference there, and that's we overstated the vacancy of the property, accounting for 1.4 million in vacancy deduction below the line. And when adjusting for that and adjusting lower than projected gross potential, we still support the original assessment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Harmon, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yes, thank you. So this property is interesting because the county applies a 28% vacancy rate to it. If we look at the actual vacancy at the property over the past year, it started the year at 30% vacant, ended the year at 26% vacant. So right in that range of the county's 28% vacant, yet the NOI achieved in 2023 is much lower than what the assessment is. Now, the county will hear, oh, you need to add that income for the 28% vacancy and then deduct it back out. But what the property's reported takes care of that. It nets it out. It doesn't add it in. It doesn't take it back out. So that 2023 NOI is reflective of what this property was operating at when it was at the county's vacancy rate of 28%. Again, it was started the year at 30%, ended the year at 26%. It's pretty close to the county's 28% throughout the course of the year. And yet, according to the county's analysis of the INE, it achieved an NOI of $5.1 million. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. All right, it's just among the board. The only fly in the ointment I see here, what the appellant just said, the operating year column E, but it's missing the gross potential rent of the vacant square feet of property. So if you add that back in, I think the county's right on. I mean, initially I thought, the expenses were a little bit low, but when they test it out, it ends up a little bit higher. So I'm fine with the assessment. Okay. And around.
I'm fine with the original assessment, to be honest. I mean, they did even the below the line deductions that he used. It's just a little extra topping there, but yeah, I'm okay with it. I'm okay with the original.
Mr. Mendez?
Yeah, well, I would say I'm okay with your assessment. The vacancy was overstated by the county, so they're getting a break on that. The average expenses are fine. I mean, they're above the 4-year average for the expenses, so the original assessment.
Yeah, I am as well. What threw me off was column E. And then I look back at the assessment in the prior years, and I was just trying to, how could it be so off? But I think after hearing everything, I think I'm okay with where it ended up.
I had issues on vacancy, but the appellant doesn't. So I'm not going to belabor it. Everybody's happy with it. I'm happy with it.
Okay. Mr. Yates, anything? to add?
No, vacancy.
Too high,
No.
way too low.
All right, then I'm going to move to confirm the county at 104,610,900. Second.
I'll second that.
A motion is second by Mr. Miranda. All in favor?
Okay.
Opposed? It's unanimous. County's confirmed. 104,610,900. Thank you. Okay, next case on the agenda is RPC 1500907 and 3033 Wilson Boulevard. Mr. Harmon, you can start with your 8 minutes on this property, sir.
So this property is a 162,000 square foot office building built in 1987. It's in Clarendon. As of the date of value, this property was 48% vacant with an additional 25% of leased NLA set to expire in 2024, which would take vacancy up to 73%. Some of these tenants with their leases expiring in 2024 had vacated by the time we inspected it mid-year 2023. We observed these tenants out of the space, were told by the owner that they were gone. To start, I'd like to direct your attention to page 8 of the county's PDF response, where they've included an article stating that this building is intended to be redeveloped as an office to residential conversion. For this property, it makes sense. After all, it's a 37-year-old building with high vacancy. We've seen this with comparable buildings. We've seen sale comps for this type of redevelopment for this type of building. Specifically, 4601 Fairfax Drive sold in July of 2023 for $102 per square foot. That sale count was in the same boat as this one, very comparable. Both 1987 buildings, both high vacancy, both had owners who hoped to redevelop them as apartments. Again, 4601 Fairfax, that property was 60% occupied at the time of sale. This property is just over 50% occupied. So similar occupancies, both 1987 builds, both intended to be redeveloped as multifamily. So knowing that, what would this property sell for as of January 1? Well, we know from 4601, a buyer placed a value of $102 per square foot on that building. The assessment on this building is $258 per square foot. So if we're looking at this property as what would it transact at between a willing buyer and willing seller as of the date of value, that sale count that occurred prior to the date of value just down the road in Ballston is a great reference point. The county essentially states that this property is a comparable to the sale count, yet should be assessed 2.5 times higher than the sale count. If we value this property at the same amount as the redevelopment sale count at 4601 Fairfax, it would come out to a value of about $16.5 million. Of course, as you can see on the appeal, our claim value is $26.5 million. So $10 million above what that sale count supports. Now, looking further at the county's article that they included as support for the assessment in their response, we see that the proposed redevelopment calls for 312 multifamily units and 7,000 square feet of retail space. If we apply the county's guideline rates for multifamily and retail lands without any contest, we just accept the guideline rates as they exist for 2024, the value of the property as an approved site plan redevelopment for 312 multifamily units and 7,000 square feet of retail space comes out to $27.3 million. Again, our claim value is $26.5 million, so just below that. And keep in mind that $27.3 million is as entitled. So a deduction from that would need to be made to account for the cost needed to gain approval, and that brings you in line with our value. So the county's article that they've included in support of their case really makes the case that it should be a lower value based on a site plan that could be coming, based on a sale comp of a comparable property that was an operating office at the time of sale, was still an operating office as of the date of value, sold for $102 a foot. So this article again gives us those two separate valuation points, both supporting lower values than the assessment. Now, knowing that these two different valuations that the county's provided based on including this article in their support, why is the current assessment so much higher than what it would likely transact at as of the date of value? Well, the issues that we appealed were the potential rental income, the operating expenses, the cap rate, and the DFL. And today I just want to focus on the potential rental income and the operating expenses. For the potential rental income, you can see the county's rent roll analysis on page 7 of the appeal. There's two issues on this page. First, the county has imputed rent at $65.70 on the owner-occupied space, where the rent roll is listed no rent for that space. That $65.70 that the county's assumed for that space, that's significantly higher than any other tenant in the building And it has the effect of skewing the county's rent analysis higher than what the property actually supports. I don't know what the rationale for imputing rent on owner occupied space at $65.70 per square foot when no other lease in the building comes close to that is, but it does skew the analysis higher. Second, the county fails to adequately account for concessions on this property. Our analysis in column G1 on the test page uses actual contract rents in place as of the date of value, less the county's uniform concession rate of 10% to get to the rental rate claimed for in-place leases of $41.56 per square foot. For the vacant office space, the county states the most recent office lease was at $42 per square foot. If we impute the same uniform concession rate of 10% to that most recent lease to account for rental abatements that are present in almost every lease, we get to a rate indicative of the most recent leasing activity, which is $37.80 per square foot. This compares to the county's test, which imputes rent at $40 per square foot. Adjusting the in-place and vacant office rental rates to reflect the uniform concessions results in a reduction to income on the county test column of just under $400,000. For operating expenses, the assessment imputes operating expenses at almost the exact rate that the property incurred in 2023. Now, this is inconsistent with how the assessment has treated income. The assessment's grown gross effective income at the property by $1 million above what was achieved in 2023, yet assumes operating expenses will be exactly the same. If we're going to accept grossed up income to reflect a higher occupancy as the assessment has done, we should also gross up operating expenses to reflect a higher occupancy as well. At this property, we can get an estimate for what those expenses will be. We can look at variable expenses alone. We see that utilities alone were over $6 per occupied square foot in 2023. Extrapolating this figure to the amount of excess vacancy that is income imputed on the assessment, we see that expenses need to be increased by $220,000 to account for the increase in utilities alone based on the expected increase in income that the assessments assumed. Correcting the assessment for imputing rent on the owner-occupied space, considering concessions, and increasing operating expenses to reflect the stabilized occupancy assumed gets the value of the property closer to what it would likely trade for as of the date of value. We have great comps. The county's provided that article that states it's probably going to be a redevelopment. What would it sell for? But we have an example right down the street in Ballston that sold for $102 a foot last year. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Peralta for the county, please.
Yes, thank you. For this property, we did see that when comparing the new information, the county originally had a square feet that was less than what was reported in most recent 2023 INE. When looking at the county's test, we did account for the retail's portion that wasn't included originally in the 2023 rent roll. We do know that there's a fitness center, second floor lounge, and that square footage wasn't included in the original assessment, nor was it included in the department's test. So just would like to note that this property has more square footage than what we see here before us. But based on the information that was provided, I did not include that, but did want to test as accurately as possible. So when looking at the vacant square footage, again, the county did underestimate with this case the vacant square footage. I think there's a difference there of 182 square feet shy of what was originally reported in 2023. And then upon the test, the county did find that there was a lease that expired, and so we included that lease square footage in our vacant square footage adjustment. You'll see that the appellant's column G1 doesn't account for that extra vacant square footage, nor did it account for that square footage that the tenant had left. So nothing as far as the income for vacant space and nothing as far as the vacant square footage in accounting for the total vacancy. In the potential gross potential of the property, the county was 811,600 shy of what the gross potential of the property should be, given the vacant square footage. And then in the test, we were below what the reconstructed gross potential would have been, 761,287 shy of what the gross potential should have reported, given the vacant square footage income. The expenses were consistent with what this property has been reporting. The original assessment had $11. We did bump that up upon review slightly based on the trending of the new 2023 information. And then overall, when we're looking at the NOI, the original assessment was 529,453 less than what the gross potential of the property should be. And then even in the test, we were even higher at 555,451 less than what the gross potential of this property should be. I think it's interesting that you'll see the differences with the years 2020 to 2022. You see the NOIs there that were projected, and then with the absence of the vacant income, you see how drastically that changes in column E. So if you compare A, B, and C NOIs to column E, you'll see that big difference there. And that's mainly due to just the vacant square footage not being reported. When I look at the excess vacancy below the line, we did make reductions on both ends. And with respect to the test, we're actually allotting more that the appellant didn't point out as far as the vacancy. Again, we're including some space that was vacated, but not included in the income portion nor the vacant portion, but was captured in the county's test. We do come up with a higher value than original, but we're actually supporting the original value based on the information we had. I think what's interesting about this property, and I did point this out and include it in the packet, that with respect to the vacancy, to me, you'd have to question whether this is a true trend in vacancy or not, when the overall outcome, or I guess the position of the owner is to convert this property. So the appellant spoke about so many leases expiring in 2023 or 2024. This would indicate or point to the fact that it's probably more due to the conversion of the property versus market indicators saying that we can't rent this space out. I don't think there's a motivation for the owner to do such new tenancies in the building. So therefore, you'll see the decline in occupancy on this property. So to compare this property to a market office property kind of lends to some doubt based on, the overall goal of the owner is to convert this property. So with that, I do ask that the board confirm the original assessment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Questions from board members? Mr. Lawson.
Where does the 4.1 stand?
It hasn't been approved, if that's what you're asking.
Submitted, but
Yeah.
not.
What was the date it was submitted? Mr. Harmon, you should have that information.
It was in June of this year. The county's article was undated, but I believe it was June of this year.
Okay. Mr. Metzger.
Yeah, easy question. I've seen this before, but I'm just asking it now for the department. On column F, row 1A, vacant office is valued at $40.77 a square foot. Stay on that column and go down below the line, and the value per square foot of rent loss is not the same amount. It's only $40. Is that correct? Is that the way it should be? Shouldn't they be the same number, the dollars per square foot number?
I stand corrected. The number used is $40 a square foot. So $40 times 77,164. So in column F, that should, oh, actually it does read $40. It doesn't read $40.77. It's $40 times the 77,164 square feet. There's a slash there after the 40.
Under the vacant square foot.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's in one font. Oh, great. Great answer. Thank you. But there's another.
Okay.
That Mr. Peralta had is, yeah, the owner occupied space is at $65 per square foot. But where do you see that the county used that number for the assessment? I mean, you seem to indicate that the county used that number that it affects the assessment, but it really doesn't.
It does. It is
So I can-
indicated on the rent roll,
Who was that
Jose.
question to?
Yeah, this is for Mr. Harmon.
Yes, so on page 7 of the appeal, you'll see the county's rent roll analysis. And
Right.
highlighted in red is car properties at $65.70 a foot. And if you follow that office base rent down to the bottom of the page, you'll see that they arrive at a rate of $47.12. That's used to support the rates they used in their analysis. Now, by imputing a above market rent on owner occupied space, it skews all the analysis. Looking at actual rents in place, it results in a lower rate.
But I mean, it affects the average, but it doesn't really affect the number that the county's using. Okay,
So
so
you take concessions then from that number, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, I just had a quick question for Rob. Do you think the filing to go residential increases or decreases the value?
I didn't look at that until it's, said and done. The county doesn't take any position on proposed conversion or proposed site plan approvals. We look at what's currently being assessed.
It's not Jimmy. Okay, any other questions? Okay, Mr. Peralta, if you take a minute to wrap up, please.
Yes, just to clarify, that car properties in the 2022 rent roll, they did have a rent at $68 a square feet. I did highlight that on the rent roll to show that didn't do it for this year, 2023, which I thought was kind of odd. So I did highlight it to say, given what they had previously in 2022, we use $65 a square foot. Absent of that, if you remove that from the calculations, the average is still $46.73. The county is using a number below that, and it's consistent with what we see in the property. Given that, we do find that the original assessment is well supported, given everything that the county has provided. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Harmon, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yes, thank you. So, we've heard a lot of issues from Mr. Peralta about what's the NLA of this property. It's reported twice on the I&E as what the owner reported. It begs the question, why did we inspect every property last year if the county still assumes different square footage than what we saw and what the owners reported? Why wasn't this question asked before the hearing? We heard about the car properties rent just now. This should have been asked before the board. We could have cleaned this up beforehand. It almost seems intentional to save them to the board to kind of muddy the merits of the case. The county also fails to mention when they're reporting 2020 to 2022 NOI, that's representative of tenants who are in there on pre-pandemic leases. They conveniently leave out that those leases were 20% higher than post-pandemic leases. Income has decreased post-pandemic at this property. We've seen this across the county. The county also includes an article from June of 2024 stating that it's slated for redevelopment. If that's the county's position that we should consider that, it's included in their response. We have a great sale count to look at for that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right, it's just among the board.
First, I just.
You all know how I feel about site plans. I mean, it's very black and white. It's not relevant.
That's all I was gonna say.
Yeah. I mean,
All that's just chaff.
yeah, so
Next
right.
year.
So for the appellant to say they should consider it, I mean, this assessment was January 1, long before that was even filed. So
Right. So let's go on to the substance.
applicable to this. That being said, again, I mean, when you look at what the property reported and you adjust for the vacant square footage, the income that would have come off of that, I'm fine with the assessment. I mean, it's a $11 million decrease, 21%. from last year. I mean,
He raised $65, I included that, I'm glad you asked. He explained it. I mean, I do think the rent roll's clear. Not on just all of it. I'm fine with it.
yeah, ironically, if you take, the E1, the reconstructed, adding back in the square footage, vacant square footage potential income, use the appellant's cap rate of 10.15, not using anything below the line, it comes in at 41,155,000. It would be any closer to what I already had. Not that I'm suggesting that we go that route.
It just as a test.
Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Lawson.
Yeah, I kind of look at this a little bit differently. And that is that, the county cited in their own portion that it's an obsolete building. The application aims to revitalize the property by demolishing an obsolete office building. So you have a situation where you can't rent the empty space. I mean, who's going to move in there knowing that this is hovering over? We have the same situation. We've sold our property and it's going through the process of a 4.1. And I've had a number of people come forward. As soon as I tell them, well, we may tear it down in about 2 years. That's it. No interest.
And
That's not my experience. I think lots of times startups or swing space. So this is a good thing. I'm not locked in for 5 years. Oh, boy.
Well, yeah, but
It
still,
could go either way.
you got moving costs and
But once it happens, I mean, the income is the income,
Yeah,
the income is there, they're taking into account what this current situation.
but we've got to keep in mind, I hear what you all are saying, that if this were simply based on income stream, yes. But you've got to look at what if this is being sold? And so if it's being sold based on what exists right now, and ignoring the 4.1, no one's going to pay for it. No one's going to pay this amount for it. They're going to, and so what I did, it was a modest decrease. I upped the cap rate on the test and ended up at 40,218,150.
Is that because on the data value, this is a little bit of a tainted building because the
Yeah,
site plan was allegedly coming? Now it's here, but at the time it was coming.
well, obviously Carr bought a contingent. So if they don't get the zoning, they're not going to buy it.
Right,
And,
which, again, is the same thing, that we don't know what's going to happen.
Right.
Well,
And we see plenty of properties that have site plans on them. And they haven't, executed the ability to use the site plan and reassess it.
With the site plan anyway.
I mean, yeah. Or rather, on the site.
It's standard behavior and
Yeah, so-
appropriate behavior.
I think it'll be a different animal this time next year, should this site plan get approved. This year.
Well, next year, then it's simple, just square footage times
Right.
site plan value.
We were,
Go ahead.
didn't we bump up the cap rate on 50% vacancy for office? But we did that on a couple of
I
cases.
think we did. What is extraordinary amount of vacancy?
What's this vacancy? Yeah. It's high. I just think it's not, I just think a modest decrease is in order. And
Yeah, I think your number.
here's no one agrees. Yeah.
There are a lot of, what ifs, what if you do with that? And a lot of times the site plans don't get executed for years and they don't do anything. And the reason I asked about the $65 is because Mr. Harmon seems to suggest that it affected the assessment, but really doesn't, and
Why
Let's
does
see
it?
how it's
It's in the average.
it's just affecting the average. And
Because it's a relatively small portion of
that
the
number
NOI.
out. The average is still higher than what the county used. So
This is what
all the
Rob
numbers
said.
that the county used, I think they're more than generous. But it's really the figure.
Jose, it's a little bit different when you have an owner who files a site plan versus a contract purchaser. And it takes about 8 months to get a zoning filed for a 4.1. So on January 1, this property was probably, I don't know for 100%, but it's 90%. It was already under contract. So, but I'm by myself, so.
No, I appreciate your income. I mean, your
Yeah.
input that
Yeah.
Helpful in knowing more about
Thank
the
you.
site plans. You've been through it. But, you know, I think in this particular property, the income is still there and, you know, we'll see what happens next year.
Yeah.
All right.
All right, I'm gonna move to confirm the county, 41,775,400. Do I have a second? Mr. Mendez, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, so that is 5-2. Greg and. Okay, the county's confirmed at 41,775,400. The next case on the agenda is RPC 170011010 Boulevard. The agent has asked to withdraw this case yesterday afternoon. I assume there's no objection. You can also.
No.
Okay, I'll move to accept the withdrawal. Second.
Second.
And Madam Chair, if I may, just for the record, this is based on the board's admonition on the case last week, which was filed on similar grounds. And the
Either
board's,
reason, I just have the withdrawal.
okay, I'm just stating for the record that it's based on what was said at last week's hearing and the anticipation that that was going to be said as well on this case.
Not relevant. I'm sorry, we have a motion and a second by Mr. Lawson. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Unanimous. The case is withdrawn. The next case on the agenda is RPC 1602918 at 1735 North Lynn Street. Mr. Harmon, you can start your minutes.
So 1735 Lynn is a 288,000 square foot office building in Roslyn. As of the date of value, it was 31% vacant. NOI at this property has decreased each of the past 3 years. Now to start, the county states at the very beginning of their case, bullet point number 1, that this property sold in 2019 for $128.8 million. Now, I assume this is listed as bullet 1 because the implication is that since the assessed value is lower now, then the current assessment must be reasonable. However, the county fails to flesh out this argument or provide any data to support that the current assessment is low enough given market conditions. Well, we did provide this. We did flesh out this argument. We included the data in the board book that we attached to the appeal and provided to the board members at the beginning of the season. On pages 2 and 17 of the board book, we provided what's called a paired sale analysis, which compares what properties that have sold twice, properties that sold once just before the pandemic and a second time right after the pandemic, what they sold for each time and what that difference was to try to get a handle on how much has the overall market decreased. This is analysis that the county did not provide, but again, it's in our board book. This analysis shows on average, office properties in Arlington County have lost 40% of their value from pre-pandemic to current. This analysis alone supports a $7 million reduction to the current assessment. The paired sale data is further supported by the analysis for similar properties in DC and Fairfax County. Neighboring data sets that show Fairfax County paired sales decreased over 50% from their pre-pandemic sale prices, and DC properties have decreased 30%. Asserting that since it's lower than the 2019 sale price, doesn't fully flesh out the argument, doesn't provide the analysis necessary to see, okay, we both agree the current assessment's lower as it should be, but is it low enough given current market conditions? Once you look at the data, you see that it is still $7 million higher than that analysis would suggest. Now we can look further into detail into these paired sales. We can zero in on one sale, 1776 Wilson. This was, I chose this one because this was used by the county's expert, Peter Korpax, in his cap rate report that the county has testified they relied on this year. So 1776 Wilson is a 2012 building. The subject is a 1987 building, yet 1776 Wilson sold for 34% less than its pre-pandemic sales price, despite occupancy at that property remaining stable between the two sales. That sale that the county expert used, by the way, the expert determined the cap rate was over 9.5%. That compares to the assumption for this property of a cap rate just under 7.9%, despite the older effective age and the much higher vacancy. Now, 1776, it's the county's experts' sale count. Look at the paired sale, it decreased 34% from pre-pandemic to post-pandemic. Add to this for this property that the subject was 92% occupied when it sold in 2019. Today, as of the date of value, it's only 68% occupied. That's an increase in vacancy of 24%. So given those two data points, the paired sale analysis, the county's expert property of 1776 decreasing 34% from pre-pandemic to post-pandemic, and the increase in vacancy at the subject of 24% since the date of sale, we see that the assessment has not gone nearly far enough to capture the fair market value. So knowing that this property, based on market parameters, has decreased even more than a market decrease of 40% due to the vacancy increasing at this property from 8% pre-pandemic to over 31%, our proposed value is arrived at primarily by adjusting two variables on the county's test. That's the operating expenses and the cap rate. For the operating expenses, this property has been at or above 30% vacancy for each of the past 3 years, yet still incurred operating expenses on average of $2.7 million. This is what the county's test has imputed. Now, this rate, as we've discussed in prior cases, is low for two reasons. First, as I mentioned, the historical OpEx reported is reflective of a property that was on average 32% vacant, not the 28% vacant that the assessment assumes and uses for income. Second, the county's test makes no adjustment for increased costs that are present in the market year over year due to natural growth due to inflation. The initial assessment imputed OpEx at over $3 million, yet this was reduced upon review. Next, the assessment assumes a buyer would value this property as of January 1st, 2024, using a 7.88% cap rate. We know from the county's expert report that they testified they relied on to derive the cap rate for this property, that the expert came up with a cap rate of 9.5% for that property that was much newer. This property is a 1987 build. The county expert property was a 2012 build. The 2012 build, I believe, was 85% occupied. This property is less than 70% occupied. So a much better situated building. The county's expert said it should be a 9.5% cap. This one, the assessment ended up at a 7.88%. So, looking at the market, we can look at other market sales that have occurred over 2023 and see that neighboring properties, again, better situated, newer, better occupancy, are also at cap rates that are over 200 basis points higher than what the assessments assume for this property. So taken together, the county's tests lowered the potential rental income as we contested on appeal. The county's test included a DFL as was contested on the appeal, but then the county's test dropped the operating expenses by over $300,000. If we apply the initial assessment's OpEx to the county test, we see that the assessment is reduced closer to what the data tells us buildings have decreased from pre-pandemic to post-pandemic values. Now, keep in mind this property has seen decreasing NOI for each of the past 3 years. Over the same time frame, occupancy has decreased as well. Thank you.
Good, thank you. Mr. Crowther for the county, please.
Yes, thank you. Just an overall summary of this property. We did review this property in previous years. We did do the inspections. Now, this property did have a major renovation that affected the income in the past 3 years. I believe the retail portion was completely vacated due to the renovations of this property, which included a lot of the ground floor amenities, the lobby, the facade, and then there was another third floor terrace that was included in the property. And so to look at this, the history of the property and say it was indicative of the market, it's really not a true indication of the market, but more so due to the renovations done to the property. So in looking at this original assessment, we did find in CoStar upon valuation that 67,967 square feet was vacant as of the date of value. With that, we did see that leases were signed and in 2023. There was a number of leases signed in 2023. So that's where the county's vacant square foot position came from. Upon review, we did find that there was more vacant square footage, more so probably leased but not moved in, is what I'm assuming as far as why the difference in square footage there. And you'll see that I included the CoStar summary report of what is actually vacant in the property. And the vacancy that's available is 28,965 square feet that's available. And that's a difference of 60,303 square feet when you compare the apartment's test at 89,268, in which we corrected our, I guess, projection of what is vacant of the property based on the rent roll that was received in 2023. So that's why there's those major differences there with the square foot vacant. Again, looking at the rent roll, you'll see that there was a lease that was signed in 2024, and you'll see that that was for a large portion of the space there that's vacant, 41,596 square feet. There was a lease signed in June. But I didn't include that as far as what we found in the 2023 rent roll. We try to keep that separate. But on page 7 of 65, you'll see the number of leases that were signed in 2023, March of 2023, October of 2023, and December of 2023. When looking at the this property, we did find that we allocated no vacancy below the line, no excess vacancy, but upon review, given what the new information we had, we did afford that below the line, and given the income that was not reported, our potential gross income was much higher than what we even much lower than what we reconstructed. You'll see that we're almost shy 2,800,000 shy of what the property, when projected correctly, would achieve. They're not reporting many concessions for this property. We apply the guideline 28%, and then we look at the expenses, which we over projected based on previous years. As you see there in columns A, B, and C, the expenses were at best $10. The county is at 11. And then what they actually reported was $9. So we did adjust that based on what we found to $9.50, and then the overall valuation on the test was higher than the original assessment. So therefore, the county just moves to support the original assessment. And I think that's all I have. And so we're open for questions. I would like to add, for this property, we did decrease the assessment by almost 15% for the improvement. And that's about $11.4 million decrease, based on the information that we had currently. Again, the 67,000 square feet vacant versus the actual 89,000. But we know as of today that the property is at 10% vacant. So we're open for questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you both. Questions from board members? Mr. Mendez.
Yeah, for the county, I'm just wondering why the cap rate changed on the test.
Let's see. It didn't change. It was just the rounding, 7.88 to 7.878.
Okay, so the correct cap rate should be 7.88.
No, due to our limitations in RIAS, we always include what the actual cap rate should be in our test column.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Metzgen.
For the department, I want to make sure I understood this. You talked about CoStar reports, I think a higher vacancy, some different vacancy than you used.
A lower.
Not in your, but this CoStar reference was about when, what month, what year?
So as of the valuation date, when I valued this property, I looked at CoStar and it said 67,967 square feet was vacant on the property.
So
Go
You
ahead.
found a CoStar report from early January 2024. It gave you this information.
Yes, well, not early January. It was probably December timeframe.
December 23. Oh, in anticipation of this. Okay, cool stuff. Okay. Second question is, and my eyes do not deceive me this time, so I'm going to ask you the exact same question that I asked in the last case where my eyes failed me. On column F, the test, I just want to get this straight. I have no right or wrong in my mind. Row 2, column F, $40 a square foot per office vacant. And then go down below the line, it's not $40, it's 44. So same question, shouldn't they be the same dollars per square foot? Accounting for office space that's vacant?
It should be, it is $40 a square feet. If it was 44, then that would be incorrect. We'd be giving more than what we value the vacant square footage of office.
You wrote off more for the appellant than you should have. But nonetheless, the test came up with a higher total valuation. Okay, good. Thanks a lot. I'll never ask that again.
You can ask it.
Well, maybe I'll just bring it up and not make a statement.
No, Mr. Peralta?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, I guess the value, the current assessment represents 15% decrease in improvement value of $11 million. We know this property is being leased, and the projection going forward is much better than what we see here today. The original assessment captured a portion of that income that was leased. The test quantifies a number that is consistent with what was reported in 2023. So we ask that the board confirm the original assessment. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Harmon, if you take a minute to wrap up, sir.
Yes, so to clarify, the retail tenants have been in there the past few years. One of the tenants has been in there since 2014, another since 2015, two others since 2022. Only one of them was a 2023 tenant. So that income has been captured in the historical reporting of this property. It's also captured in the stabilized potential that we submitted for this property. Main issues, again, operating expenses. The assessment assumes there will be no change in 2024 from 2023. We heard Mr. Peralta speak lengthily about new leases at the property. They've captured that income. They have not captured those operating expenses. So essentially the test is saying we're going to have more occupancy, but janitorial is going to stay the same. Electricity is going to stay the same. Water is going to stay the same. Income's going to go up. Operating expenses will not. And then, cap rate, this is below the county's own expert recommended rate for this property. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you both. All right, it's just among the board. Mr. Yates?
Oh, well, on his point with the expenses, I looked at adjusting it. It changed it minimal on the test. And he's at $11 on the assessment. So, I mean, that's a pretty good number.
Oh, I'm sorry, missed the last. What about $11?
That's where they are on the county's assessment.
Right, the 3 million is.
Oh, the original.
Yeah, on the
More.
original, and more than.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
probably too high.
I thought the test was a little low, so I upped it 50 cents, and it's peanuts.
Okay, 50. That was going to be my question.
Doesn't change it. Results.
The original still would have been lower.
Yep. By
I'd
far.
like to bring up something for us that pervades everything that we hear a lot correctly. And this Pellin isn't the only one, but probably the best purveyor of the concept that fair market value is really critical. And per statute. And I'm taking that very seriously, but I have a tough time except when the appellant is the building that's sold using that comp, and we have had one this year. Taking one or two sales and saying that's a fair market value for another building, the one that we're looking at today. So I keep getting although it's a legitimate appeal point, I still come back to the I&E. How is the performance of this building? I'm just sharing that. It's kind of a conundrum for me, but that I've come around to that conclusion. Anybody can criticize it or agree with it as you wish.
You have to look at interest rates too. So you look at both.
Well, sure, and plans, it's gonna be demolished or it's
Yeah.
tainted and then we get into esoteric $20,000 assessments by professional assessors or appraisers. I don't know how we do that
Well,
legitimately.
the big deal this whole year has been cap rates. And, you know, we sometimes adjust a little bit up in here, but the argument that everybody's making is cap rates are just too aggressive on the part of the county.
Sure,
So given that we're not going to change them.
and last year
county's
as well.
okay. Yeah. But this year you also had the interest rates up.
So everybody's-
Yeah, I'm fine. I did the same as Mark, trying to adjust expenses, but still, looking at overall the numbers, eyes and what they reported is much, much higher, so.
Then I will move to confirm the county. Do I have a second? Mr. Yates, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay, it's unanimous. The county's confirmed at 83,178,700. Moving to the last case on the agenda is RPC 1601100. Oh, at 1800. Robin, you can start with your 8 minutes on this property.
I have nothing to add on this one. We're okay with the county's revised figure of $86,421,300.
I didn't know this was called. It's a legacy from the original.
Very minor. Or no, it's not. It's 2 million. This is a question from a standpoint, does the board want to hear this? If we don't have to do that amount, or
I mean, if they agree with the revised number, I'm okay with them.
It's a small number, a small adjustment.
I didn't want to take away your.
Yeah, well,
I-
they could
I-
testify saying,
Mr. Peralta, you don't have an issue with that?
No.
Okay. And then I will. We'll move to accept the county's revised number 86,421,300. Second,
Second,
Lawson, all in favor? Aye, opposed, okay, it's unanimous. The county revised number of 86,421,300.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Business. Okay, we will stand adjourned at 10:39. Reconvene next Tuesday morning, October 1st at 9 a.m. It's a virtual meeting for the board members. That just about does it. Thanks,
Great.
everybody.
thank you.
All right.
"Where'd you see from?"